We find the defendant guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
I know what I wanted it to be, but I didn't think I'd be that worried, and I was so grateful.
Guilty on all counts. For the first time, a parent has been convicted for their child carrying out a mass shooting at school. We'll have the reactions from families and the implications the verdict in Michigan could have nationwide. Plus,
if the bill fails, I want to be absolutely clear about something. The American people are going to know why it failed.
President Biden goes off on Republicans as the border deal they demanded comes apart at the seams because too many of them now say no. And in another first, former President Trump has no immunity from charges he tried to stop the bedrock of American democracy, the peaceful transfer of power. All that and more coming up on Scripps News tonight, starting right now. We'll get to those major stories in just minutes, but we start with this new development just within the past hour. The man in charge of carrying out immigration policy under the Biden administration is keeping his job by the skin of his teeth, at least for now.
On this vote, the yeas are 214 and the nays are 216. The resolution is not adopted.
It was a nail-biter finish, but tonight, with Speaker Mike Johnson presiding, Republicans' historic effort to push a sitting cabinet member out of office failed. 4 Republicans joined all Democrats to vote against impeaching Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas. House Republicans leveled 2 articles of impeachment against the Homeland Security Secretary. They accused him of willfully refusing to comply with immigration laws and breaching the public trust. They blame him for the record surge of migrants at the southern border. But Democrats said policy disagreements aren't grounds for impeachment, and enough Republicans agreed, but it's not over yet. A spokesperson for Speaker Johnson said on X that House Republicans fully intend to bring the articles of impeachment back to the floor when they have the votes for passage. On the other side of Capitol Hill, an admission of defeat from Republicans on another front in the immigration fight and new fighting words from the White House. A bipartisan border deal is crumbling in real time before ever coming to a vote.
We had a very robust discussion about whether or not this product could ever become law. And it's been made pretty clear to us by the Speaker that it will not become law.
I'm legitimately surprised at where we are at this moment because as Republicans, we've done lots of press conferences at the border. We've had lots of conversations to say things have got to change. Now we get to this moment. I've got so many colleagues that are backing away.
The Republicans' chief negotiator and their leader in the Senate both now say the bill they worked on and championed for weeks and months will never become a reality. More and more Republican senators turned against it after running into a brick wall of opposition built by former President Donald Trump and top House Republicans. The sudden collapse has President Biden seething. Today, he urged Congress to pass the national security package, which also includes aid for Ukraine and Israel. But he called Republicans out for turning their backs on policy changes they wanted to appease Trump.
All indications are this bill won't even move forward to the Senate floor. Why? A simple reason. Donald Trump. Because Donald Trump thinks it's bad for him politically. He'd rather weaponize this issue than actually solve it. So for the last 24 hours, he's done nothing, I'm told, but reach out to Republicans in the House and the Senate and threaten them and try to intimidate them to vote against this proposal. Frankly, they owe it to the American people to show some spine and do what they know to be right.
Trump himself used his own bully pulpit online at campaign rallies and behind the scenes to gather Republican opposition. And he told supporters in Nevada he'd be fine with taking the blame.
They're blaming it on me. I said, that's okay. Please blame it on me. Please. Because they were getting ready to pass a very bad bill. And I'll tell you what, a bad bill is, I'd rather have no bill than a bad bill.
And House Speaker Mike Johnson said from the outset he was in touch with Trump about the issue and called the Senate bill dead on arrival. But some of his colleagues in the House aren't happy with how things are shaking out.
I think there's been a real lack of leadership on this, and what I'm mostly disappointed in is that we're not having that conversation of, okay, what's round two? We need a round two here. because otherwise we're getting nothing on the border. And I think that's an unacceptable thing for our voters.
President Biden says he's ready to take this issue out on the campaign trail. Turning now to another major story, former President Trump says he isn't done fighting yet to claim presidential immunity from charges he tried to overturn his 2020 election defeat. An appeals court ruled today against that argument, saying he can be tried. National political correspondent Avajoy Burnett is following all the twists in Trump's multiple legal sagas and explains today's ruling.
A federal appeals court in Washington, D.C. has ruled former President Donald Trump does not have presidential immunity. This was a unanimous decision from the 3-judge panel. And they said the former president is now citizen Trump. And because of that, he has to go through the legal process just like anyone else. We want to read for you a portion of what they wrote in this more than 50-page document. They said, "We have balanced former President Trump's asserted interests in executive immunity against the vital public interests that favor allowing this prosecution to proceed. We conclude that concerns of public policy, especially as illuminated by our history and the structure of our government, compel the rejection of his claim of immunity in this case." The former president's legal team, of course, argued that he has presidential immunity, and because he was impeached on Capitol Hill but acquitted, prosecution amounts to double jeopardy. We were able to speak with a law professor about this.
Even if he were acting in his official capacity, that does not give him license to break the law. He is, as president, bound to faithfully execute the laws. And if he violates the laws, he can be impeached, but he can also be criminally prosecuted. And that's part of the idea that we don't have kings, we have presidents. And maybe you can't be prosecuted while you're president, but certainly you can be prosecuted after you are no longer president.
Former President Trump has been very vocal about this in social media. He said with no immunity, the presidency will lose its power and prestige. His campaign also issued a statement about this. They said prosecuting a president for official acts violates the Constitution and threatens the bedrock of our republic. President Trump respectfully disagrees with the D.C. Circuit's decision and will appeal it in order to safeguard the presidency and the Constitution. The former president's legal team has until next week, Monday, February 12th, to appeal this to the U.S. Supreme Court. Avajoy Burnett, Scripps News, Washington.
So the big question here, what's next for Trump's legal team? A question for our next guest, former federal prosecutor Mitchell Epner, now an attorney practicing criminal defense and civil litigation. Mitchell, good to have you. If I'm not mistaken, the former president and his team have a few big options here: a hearing in front of the full D.C. Circuit Court, or an appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. Break this down for us. What's the thinking behind going in either direction?
So today was a horrible day for Donald Trump, and the case is moving very rapidly back towards a trial in front of Judge Chutkan. He has really one option at this point. He can attempt to go to the Supreme Court, which does not have to take the case. And they have to file that request by the close of business on Monday. Otherwise, the case goes back to Judge Chutkan on Tuesday, the 13th. While they could technically ask the full D.C. Circuit to hear the case, the judgment that was entered today specifically said making that request will not stop the case from being sent back to Judge Chutkan. So if he wants to slow this thing down, he only has one place that he can go, and that's asking the Supreme Court to stop it.
And slowing things down has been the common tactic from Trump's defense. We've heard the arguments from Trump's legal team. Presidents should have full immunity to carry out their duties, and without that, they can't function. Can you explain when presidential immunity is actually applicable?
So there are two separate things. The first, with regard to criminal immunity, is while somebody is president, they cannot be charged criminally either by the federal government or by state governments. And today's ruling does nothing to change that. The second thing is that with regard to civil liability, paying money, presidents are immune from suit. They have immunity for acts taken during their presidency. But it has long been understood that the reason that civil immunity was not a problem as far as making presidents follow the law is that they still face the possibility of criminal sanctions. And today's ruling, loud and clear, said that is right. If you are president, you still have to obey the criminal law.
Mitchell, thinking about how the appeals court ruled today and how things have been going, what other cards does Trump's defense team have to play here?
The cards that they have to play, they can ask the Supreme Court to hear this case. I expect that they will do that. I would be highly surprised if the Supreme Court decides to hear the case. If they do, that will cause months of additional delay. If they do not, by the end of February, the case will be sent back to Judge Chutkan, maybe the middle of March, and she will try to schedule a trial soon. It clearly won't be the trial she originally scheduled for the beginning of March, but I would not be surprised to see a June or July trial. And if that trial starts, Donald Trump is required to be in the courtroom every day. This is different than the civil trial in New York where he could come and go as he pleased. He could see a month or more sitting every day in criminal court in the District of Columbia.
Yeah, you've raised an interesting point here. The Supreme Court does not have to take this case, but we'll have to see what happens if they decide to go that route. Mitchell Epner, a former federal prosecutor, thank you so much for breaking this down for us. We always appreciate your time.
Always glad to be here. Hope to see you again.
Likewise. Up next, a jury in Michigan says a school shooter's mom could have and should have done more to prevent the tragedy from happening. What Jennifer Crumley's verdict could mean for parents of other mass shooters, coming up next.